Welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. I already see there are some names in the comments that I'm not familiar with. So I assume you're here for the local gossip, the local breakdown of Howard Eskin and Mike Sielski. No, that's not the case. I'm sure you're probably also not here for the thoughts and the feelings on Eagles-Packers that we're going to get to later on in the show. No, I assume that a big part of the reason that you might be here today is because, did we get a doozy of a media story on Sunday? We sure did. It was the NFL regular season finale, week 18, and one of the biggest lawsuits, and we are going to highlight the fact that it's a lawsuit, these are all allegations. We have no confirmation that any of the things within this lawsuit or allegations or accusations are accurate or not. But Emmanuel Acho, Joy Taylor, Skip Bayless maybe, Colin Cowherd, apparently no, apparently not. We're going to get into one of the wildest, and I mean absolutely wildest lawsuits I can remember in recent time. And a lot of it has to do with Emmanuel Acho and with Joy Taylor. We're going to get there in a little bit. And I want to welcome everybody in. If you're not familiar with the show, if you're here because you saw a tweet last night, which I'll throw up here on the screen really quickly because we have a wonderful mix of the regular listeners, the regular viewers, and then all of the new people across YouTube, Facebook, and X. I put out this tweet last night because I saw the initial accusations come out, and they are very serious accusations. Again, just to be very clear, there is a ton of just horrible things alleged in a lawsuit. A former hairdresser at Fox Sports there's accusations against Skip Bayless. There's accusations of mistreatment by a high-ranking executive at Fox Sports. Within this lawsuit, there are also mentions of Emmanuel Acho and others. But this is what I put out last night. Emmanuel Acho is a pretty opinionated fellow with lots of thoughts on the NFL. He hasn't tweeted in 8 hours on the final day of the regular season. I wonder oh my God. And this is why, okay? Because in the midst of very serious allegations, there's this underpinning of what I would consider to be not very serious allegation, which is just that it is an accusation, I guess, in some way, potentially of infidelity, but it's not that. It's not the actual point of the lawsuit. And I will say that to the alleged victim, we hope that person gets the justice they're looking for. But one of the things that came out of this is this Emmanuel Acho, Joy Taylor interaction and this implication that apparently they had been involved in a romantic relationship, at least per the complainant. It seemed like these two were in a relationship. And then what happened was, over the course of the day, again, the NFL Week 18 regular season finale slate of games, where there were some important games with legitimate playoff implications, Emmanuel Acho went dark last night. He went dark during the day. And I noted on that tweet that it had been 9 hours at that point. It's now been 19 hours. The last tweet that Emmanuel Acho put out was at 1:08 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is right after the kickoff of the early window games. Here's what Emmanuel had to say. This doesn't sound like a definitive, conclusive, this will be my last tweet of the day. After registering 2 sacks on the first drive, Micah Parsons will finish the season with at least 11.5 sacks. This means Parsons will have double-digit sacks for 4 consecutive seasons to start his career. But then you could see the comments. The top 2 comments there are already ruthless. Now listen, not everybody loved Emmanuel Acho. Not everybody thought that his commentary was their cup of tea. And he has risen to stardom. If we kind of turn back the clock a little bit, there was the time that Chris Harrison from The Bachelor, Bachelorette had to step away from the show, and Emmanuel Acho came in, and he had the book Uncomfortable Conversations, and his media star continued to rise, and now he's on Fox Sports 1. He's been on a bunch of their shows, and again, seems to have this ever-rising star within sports media. But there were a lot of people rejoicing on Twitter that, this might be coming to an end. Now, do I have anything negative to say about Emmanuel Acho? Have I ever interacted with Emmanuel Acho? Has he ever done me wrong? No. Am I rooting on his downfall? No. am I absolutely here for the comments? And am I absolutely here to kind of give you a little bit of insight and show you some of what Twitter ended up sleuthing and finding? Yes, I am. I'm going to give you some context here. So if you woke up this morning and you're like, I have no idea what happened. Like what in the actual hell is going on? Why is Emmanuel Acho's name going all around Twitter? Why is Joy Taylor's name all over Twitter? What happened? I'll break it down for you because I think it's important. And like I said, context is key. Now, we're going to start with some of like the more serious part of this. And this is kind of like what apparently was being built as a pattern of behavior, I guess we can call it, right? And some of the concerning things that were brought as part of a lawsuit. So this is, and I guess we'll try to do the right thing here. If you're triggered by the idea of assault, this is probably the time, I guess, to tune this out, although I don't think there's anything graphic in here, but we're just going to go through this really quickly. So this came out yesterday, and this was midday yesterday. This was around 2 o'clock Eastern. Exclusive, a former Fox Sports hairdresser alleged a network exec used his position to sexually harass women and says that he refused a $1.5 million offer from former FS1 host Skip Bayless to have sex with him in a lawsuit obtained by Front Office Sports. So that's a really, like, these are the serious accusations that we are neither going to really dive a ton into or poke fun at because that's just like obviously it's not a good human thing to do. But what we are going to talk about is like why people were kind of jumping on whatever was alleged between Emmanuel Acho and Joy Taylor, because again, it is kind of interesting. Now, this is part of the complaint, and this is what ends up making its way into the story. So there's this executive, Mr. Dixon, who has not been, to my knowledge as of right now, has not been charged with a crime. This is just a civil litigation that is out there. So we're just, we're going to go through this quickly. But if you go through the Twitter thread, a big part of what was alleged here is that Joy Taylor had kind of cozied up to an executive, we'll say, and had potentially engaged in infidelity. And there's also the possibility that this executive had also committed infidelity, including the fact that this executive had bought drinks and food for this hairdresser, Ms. Faraji, and for Joy Taylor as well. And that she didn't know who this executive was. They both worked at Fox Sports, and one day she sees this guy on the elevator, and as you can see here, she goes up to Joy Taylor, and it's like, hey, the guy who always buys her drinks was in the elevator, at which point she had to be like, yeah, this is this top executive at Fox Sports. Now, there are a whole lot of other things that are concerning. Joy Taylor was trying to work her way up from being like a part-time or a spot radio host in Miami. She had moved out to Los Angeles. At some point, she was on Colin Cowherd's show. She ends up getting this big gig as the center anchor, I guess we'd say, on Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp's show. And people were kind of caught off guard by the fact that Joy Taylor was going to be the host of this show. And Skip Bayless apparently fought against it. He didn't want her on the show. He didn't understand why there was a push for her to be on the show. And it's right here. It's outlined very clearly for you that he disclosed to this complainant that he did not want Ms. Taylor to be on the show, but Mr. Dixon, this executive, was adamant she should star. And this is in the midst of what is alleged to be an affair, we'll say, between the two, right? Bayless did not want her on there. Dixon asked as a friend, a favor as a friend, to have her on the show. This is where it gets very interesting. This is where the infidelity claims come up, because around 2016, Ms. Faraji, the complainant in this, attended a dinner with Joy Taylor and Joy Taylor's husband, as well as Mr. Dixon, this executive, and his wife. Again, we'll keep saying allegedly because we're just reading the accusations. During the dinner, Ms. Taylor's husband became suspicious that Ms. Taylor and Mr. Dixon were having a relationship. Soon after the dinner, Ms. Taylor's husband found evidence of the inappropriate relationship and divorced Ms. Taylor. In approximately September 2016, so the next month, Undisputed started. Ms. Taylor requested Ms. Faraji to do her hair. Okay. So what you've got right there, at least from the complaint's perspective, is some kind of a power play. Now, there is another part in this, which is even more wild, where it was explained, and let me see if I could find it here. There was it was around this executive, and it was that she was, here we go, this is it. This is actually where things got crazy, and this is where I think a lot of people who might have tried to give Joy Taylor the benefit of the doubt went, like, if this is true, this is really bad. Maybe it wasn't in this one. I had it. I'll find it. Eventually, they're talking about this executive, and Joy Taylor allegedly says that she's fine to, that the complainant shouldn't worry about any of the relationships, shouldn't worry about any of the moral opposition that someone would have to it, and that she wasn't afraid of being engaged in this relationship, or this, let's say, more personal relationship with Dixon, because eventually she was going to, like, spill the beans that, like, he forced himself on her. That was in the complaint. Now, that seems crazy, because if you're just kind of keeping up on allegations, that's a pretty awful thing to say. Like, legitimately horrible. Okay, so we have that part. Now, Joy Taylor, Emmanuel Acho. Why do we care, and why is the Emmanuel Acho thing still lighting Twitter on fire a day later? Because as people started pulling back more and more of the complaint, they found that there was an allegation that Acho and Joy Taylor were involved in a relationship. And what you end up finding, and we could just do a very quick scroll here of Twitter, but, like, this is where people had the issue. They started going back through all of Emmanuel Acho's old tweets about Joy Taylor, including this video where she's getting ready on the set. Rick Bucher has never looked more uncomfortable in his life. And as you go back, this tweet's great. The white guy, enjoy HR face, right there. All right. There are videos of Emmanuel Acho kind of boosting up Joy Taylor's profile. There was something about, like, International Women's Day. The clips are wild. The videos are wild. It's pretty much anything that he's ever said publicly in a positive way about her, people have just jumped onto. Now, does this really matter? In the grand scheme of things, if two adults have a consensual relationship, is it a big deal? No. Was it a big deal because it was the final day of the NFL regular season, and you have one of the most, as I said, outspoken, and one of the guys in sports media whose star appeared to be rising, now kind of embroiled in this scandal? Yeah, like, here's another one of the videos that people have since gone to, because some might say that it was, a little bit overdone, but on International Women's Day, celebrating Joy Taylor. Now, I don't remember what the timeline was in the allegations, but again, it was just wild. Now, affairs in the workplace, do they happen? Of course they do. I'm looking in the comments right now, and we have, like, Andrew Fawcett says, is it news that people had an affair? It happens all the time in the workplace, unfortunately. Well, there was the other accusation in this that we're not going to dive into because it is a more serious one, but that Skip Bayless had allegedly offered this complainant $1.5 million to fornicate. Now, could that be problematic for Skip Bayless? I don't know. I guess if it's true, it could be. If it's not, then it's just a baseless accusation. Then maybe he countersues for defamation. But this is one of those wild stories where you see at least a narrative that gets built around how did somebody try to rise to power, or how did somebody try to rise to their standing on the national stage. And there are Jason Whitlock, who is always very outspoken, says that he knows everybody involved, and so he decided to sit this one out. You can make of that what you will. But if you haven't gone on Twitter yet, and if you haven't searched Emmanuel Acho, or you haven't searched Joy Taylor, there is a ton to keep you entertained today. Now, again, if they were two consenting adults, that's a totally different thing, right? it doesn't seem like there's a criminal complaint on either of their behest. But it's still newsy and it's still gossipy. Like, there were always well, I'll be careful here. There have been in the past allegations or commentary around whether or not a host on one show and their co-host on the same show, could they be romantically linked? You might be able to kind of piece together a man and a woman who people over the years have thought, oh, they must be romantically entangled. Does it happen? Sure. Does it make either of these people horrible human beings? No. If the allegation about Joy Taylor essentially saying like she was going to keep the relationship with the executive going until like it wasn't useful anymore and was then potentially going to like accuse him of forcing himself on her, that's bad. Like, that is actually something that, like, if you're that executive now, in the midst of you being dragged into this entire story, boy, your ears kind of have to perk up there. Like, is there something that he's going to countersue for if that ends up being the case? Like, is he going to take action? Because that, accusations, false accusations, just not good. Not good. Jet, who I don't recognize from being in the comments before. Hello, Jet. Thanks for finding the show. Says Emmanuel Acho ain't said nothing in 19 hours on the last day of the NFL regular season. Them allegations are true. It's tricky because whenever the allegations like this come out, usually, it's not always, usually, if you are 100% adamant that what has been put out publicly about you is not true, you might run it through your attorney, through legal. If you're a forward-facing personality like that, you probably run it through your law firm, and then you put out a statement. And there was no statement issued. Now, is it possible that you're doing like a 24-hour rule? Is it possible that Emmanuel Acho, quote-unquote, breaks his silence today? Could he put out a video on all platforms? Could he maybe come out and say that, yes, I was involved in a consensual relationship, and that was it? I don't appreciate being dragged into this complaint, but that is true, and that's it. Like, he could put a lot to rest. That's probably his smartest course of action. If it's untrue, he could certainly come out very definitively and put out a statement, could put out a video, could put out something, a press release to kind of not clear his name, but essentially say this is not true. I don't know what's going to happen. If you're Emmanuel Acho and that turns out to be true, I don't know what the HR staff at Fox Sports is going to say. Do you have to declare a relationship ahead of time? Do you have to is there like a punishment? Are there ramifications for dating somebody within the office? I don't know. If you're Joy Taylor, her career might be done. If any of this is true, it could be very problematic at the very least. The one thing about the potentially setting a guy up later for what would appear to then be false accusations if everything else is true, that to me would probably end her media career. Certainly would end her employment at Fox. We'll see if that happens or not. But I don't know. All right, I'm going to go out to the comments because I saw a lot of people are talking about Jason Kelsey's show, which I did not watch yet. But I want to go out to the comments and see if anybody feels differently about what happened. Allison says, reading the comments, I have no idea what anyone's talking about. It's what I get for only being a hockey fan and not living in Philly. Just here to learn something and support Russ. Thank you, Allison. I appreciate you. It's also cold, apparently, where everybody is. Allison's down in Texas. Says 30 degrees down in Texas. Unhappy about that for now. Nico checks in with a good morning all. I'm going to kind of jump in and around. Jamie is here from the snowy Philly suburbs. A lot of people out. Ford noting about the snow that's happening in the greater Philadelphia area. All the schools are closed today. Says, by the way, the snow, again, soft society, 1 to 3 inches is nothing. My lawn isn't even covered. Maybe eventually it'll be. But the point is, schools closed only due to the timing of the storm and liability. I mean, liability is a pretty big deal. There was a year that I remember in this area, a school district that I worked at didn't call they didn't cancel school. Or maybe it was they didn't do the early dismissal, and a bus got in an accident on one of the main roads leaving town. I don't think anybody got seriously hurt, but like that's exactly why districts kind of take the proactive stance. I don't mean to do the, I walked uphill both ways to school, like in the 90s and 2000s, but like in the coal region, 6 inches of snow is like maybe a delay, maybe. I looked outside this morning and I was like, oh, this is what we're doing, huh? And it doesn't even, there's barely anything on the ground. All right. Let's see. Peter, our resident teacher, says, quick look in as my students are busy doing work. Looking forward to hearing the show during my planning period. Go Birds. Thanks, Peter. Now, I do want to get to a local story that happened because local story is certainly something. I'm going to go out here really quick, though, to Kenny's Movie Palace. Kenny's Movie Palace, thanks for checking in. Says, Russ, another thing Acho comes off as a man of God. This doesn't come off good at all. I wanted to be careful in how we touched on that because somebody's faith and how they act, I don't know. I think it's really tricky, but I will point out that one of his last tweets before he went dark, so this was like just before noon yesterday, is a video where it's very much like man of faith, and I'll play a little bit of it here, but like, yeah, we're talking about some like moral quandary kind of stuff here with Emmanuel Acho, and maybe how he presented himself versus what was going on in the background. But here's this was Emmanuel Acho just before noon yesterday. He put this video out.
Most people don't know that the relationship to God exists in 3 zones: being loved, being used, and being trusted. See, the first zone, being loved by God, well, the fact that you're watching this video and that I have the breath to speak in this video, that means that you're loved by God, I'm loved by God. So while that zone is awesome, it's not actually that unique. God so loved the world, he loves each and every one of us.
Well, that's good. Now, in fairness, it's a good video, good production. I can tell you that the comments below it are... Here's the first comment. Fedora the Explorer says, oh, you going to hell. It's something, guys. Like, there are just... The comments to that video specifically are pretty damn brutal. But I think Kenny's Movie Palace is right. I think that kind of compounds things. C-Mac says this thing about 0% true about Skip Bayless. He's almost 80 years old, had an accident covering the Cowboys where he suffered a serious injury to his scrotum. That's a true story. I don't know why C-Mac decided that this morning is the time to talk about Skip Bayless's scrotum. I don't know if it's true. Like I said, we're not getting into the serious accusations here, but that one was about him offering $1.5 million. And there were some other comments that we are not going to read on the show about an interaction between the two and something that was said, but not great. Not great. Andrew Fawcett says, allegations of this sort follow everyone, good, bad, or indifferent. They affect decision-making in the future. Reputation is important. So I'm saying, like, I don't think Emmanuel, just based on what we discussed here briefly, I don't think that it ends Emmanuel Acho's career. Now, you can say that's fair. You can say that's unfair. I think Joy Taylor is the one who ends up getting probably blacklisted from a lot of media outlets, if for no other reason than the accusation that she was going to potentially, it sounds like, lie about the nature of her relationship with the executive and him forcing, like, that one's not good. There's no way. There is no way that's going to work. Like, I can't imagine that she's going to, like, who's going to pick her up at that point? NBC Sports isn't going to pick her up. ESPN certainly is not. She could go independent. Maybe if she goes independent, there's a way to find success. But I'm not sure. Spiral Out says, shout out to the people working outside today like me. C-Mac. Now that he's done talking about Skip Bayless' scrotum, says, holy rollers are the biggest hypocrites in the world. I think it all depends. Okay. And Eric Berkey says, props to those working out in the snow. I used to work construction, and days like this stink. I think it's true. Okay. I want to get to a local story now. We've now touched on the national story, and I expected all day there is going to be more coming out. It is going to be a whirlwind. I'll be interested. I mentioned at the top of the show, maybe the one thing that was a good takeaway if you're a media fan, right? I think a lot of times you want to see that the people that you've spent your life or whatever supporting end up being good people. So Colin Cowherd was another person who had worked with Joy Taylor. And so there were questions about, oh no, was like Colin Cowherd wrapped up in this? And apparently no. Like apparently within the accusations and within the testimony or whatever, it was just said that Colin Cowherd is a professional stand-up guy, was not engaged in any of these other things that have been put out there. So as somebody who appreciates what Colin Cowherd does, I know not everybody loves Colin Cowherd. I know not everybody appreciates the way that he goes about doing his show. They think it's often just very clickbaity, very hot take, not grounded in reality or fact or whatever. I like his show, and I think he's very good at what he does. So it's good to know that at least one person with a high profile, at least per this complaint, is not engaged in any of this. So that's a positive that you could take away from it. We'll get into more. If there are any other updates later this week, I'll get back into this story. But I do want to get to a local one because there was a local story that broke, and it came by way of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was about a former sports talk radio host who has since pivoted into doing some weekend radio, doing Eagles sideline, causing a ruckus at virtually every press conference he attends. And now he's gone. Now, I brought this up last week. It was part of the show that Howard Eskin was leaving WIP. And then at some point last week, a story broke from the Inquirer claiming that Eskin had forcibly grabbed an employee, an Odyssey employee, somebody from WIP. And then as the details came out, it was that this forcible grabbing of this female employee happened at Chickies and Pete's. It was the same night, presumably, as the Brandon Graham show, where Brandon Graham noted that there was an issue between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. There was one report that came out that Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles owner, called Howard Eskin and was trying to get him to pull Brandon Graham off the air because of the damage that was being done by airing potential beef between Brown and Hurts. Then there was a kind of counter narrative out there that Lurie called Dom DeSandro, Big Dom, and that Dom was going to try to get to Eskin and they were going to talk. And well, within this, not a complaint, but within this story, it said that this female Odyssey employee interrupted a conversation between Eskin and Graham, that Eskin didn't take kindly to the interruption, and then at some point he touched her on the arm, and then that he might have pursued her and touched her on the arm again. She had asked him not to. The nature of what the actual content was, in my mind, is up for interpretation. I wasn't there. You weren't there. Apparently, some people were present and saw it. I brought up last week that I thought it was interesting, and I'm going to show you this, and then I'm going to dive into the story itself, because it wasn't the accusation story that did it. It was the commentary that came out that I found a little bit more interesting, and I didn't respond to it on Twitter because I just thought it was interesting that the guy who wrote it went this route. We'll get there in a second. But I put this out over the weekend because the more that came out, Angelo Cataldi went on to a show with, I think, Dan Cilio and tried to add some color to what the Inquirer had put out. There were people throwing out Ava Graham's name. She came out and said very conclusively that she was not part of this incident, that it was not her. Devin Caney's name had been thrown out. We've been told that Devin Caney was not the person. It sounds like it was somebody who was a behind-the-scenes person that no one would know. John Marks went and did his own live stream where he said that it had nothing to do with an on-air person, that it was only somebody who was a behind-the-scenes person over at Odyssey. So I tweeted this over the weekend. I said, on the Howard Eskin story's accusations, if there were multiple witnesses and he forcibly grabbed a female employee, remember, within the story, it says that he, was told not to touch this person. Like, the woman said, don't touch me, and then apparently he did it again. That he forcibly grabbed a female employee, wouldn't somebody have taken a video? Virtually everything ends up on social media. Also interesting that a WIP/Inky, Philadelphia Inquirer, writer, waited until now to write a takedown. And then I noted, it's not a defense of the guy, just noting that it's odd that there were apparently multiple witnesses, and it came at a live remote show comes out weeks later, and a bunch of people break their silence with their version of events. Seems odd, whatever. Which also caught the eye of John Barchard, who seemed to agree with that. As I mentioned, John Marks went and did his own thing. Angelo Cataldi weighed in. Now, obviously, Marks, Cataldi, Barchard have all worked at WIP for different amounts of time, in different shifts, had probably different interactions, right? Everybody's interactions with another person is different, but have interacted with Howard Eskin differently. Some people, this is just like normal, right? This is just how media works. Almost everybody who has been in Philly media for an extended period of time has had some kind of interaction with Howard Eskin. I have not. I think I bumped into the guy a couple of times at Flyers games in the media room or up in press row, or maybe at like it might have been when the Flyers did the new era of orange thing where the scoreboard was all the way down and it was Hilferty and Jones, Val, Camillo, Briere. They did the whole thing, and Tortorella, they did like the whole, this is the new era of orange. I think he might have been there. I don't remember ever talking to the guy. I don't have a negative thing to say about my interactions with him. I don't have a positive thing to say because we didn't really interact. But you listen to people who have interacted with him, and they're typically in one of two camps. Either they think that he's an abrasive asshole, and he comes off just exactly like he did on the radio, or there are people that say he's got a heart of gold, and he's a sweet guy, and he checks in, and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes people have very different interactions. Now, I'm not defending. It's really important to note here that if he forcibly grabbed anybody, and that person said, "Don't touch me," and he did again, that's a legitimate problem. I will also note that last July, right, is where there was the alleged groping of an Aramark employee at Citizens Bank Park, at which point Citizens Bank Park banned him from being there. He couldn't be credentialed anymore. I don't know if they have a blanket ban on him being at the stadium as a paying customer, but at least as credentialed media, he's not allowed. So as part of the Inquirer story, they mentioned the fact that like the same day that he got let go or that he parted ways with WIP, he apparently tried to get in a NovaCare center, and they didn't let him in because he didn't have a credential. And then things got even weirder because not only did he not have a credential, but he apparently tried to use the prior access that he had through Fox 29 and apparently told them that like he could be there because of the work that he was doing for Fox 29, but apparently he doesn't work for Fox 29 anymore. So it's just a very strange series of events that happened. And what I took exception to, and again, noting, I am not defending the guy. I don't have a reason to defend the guy. Contrary to the first story on today's, show, that from the national perspective about, did somebody kind of do things to get their way up the food chain? There's no benefit to me defending Howard Eskin. Is Howard Eskin going to get me a radio job? No. Do I want a radio job right now? No. I'm plenty busy enough. I'm just pointing out the fact that the one thing I was kind of surprised by, and maybe I shouldn't have been, is that a columnist from the Inquirer decided that now was the time to try to go after a guy who had already engaged in this alleged groping at Citizens Bank Park over the summer, who decided that many of the things within his story had happened a long time ago or were still happening, but were around his professionalism or lack thereof. And this person waited until Howard Eskin was gone from WIP before writing this. So I want to go through a story that was written by Mike Sielski. Now, I can tell you, I have had very few interactions with Mike Sielski over the years. One of the times that I did was because I said that he lied. It was during an episode of Snow the Goalie, and it was around the time that Jake Voracek called Mike Sielski a fucking weasel and said he wasn't going to answer his question. Now, this is during COVID. This is during the bubble. This is when we didn't have access to the players in person. You couldn't even go sit in the conference room. It was when all the seats were tarped off. And there were like maybe 20 media members, maybe more, maybe less. It wasn't that many. We were all on the lower level. Everything's tarped off. And we'd all get on this like Zoom call or Cisco web, whatever. And we would talk to the players through Zoom. It was kind of wonky. But Sielski goes to ask Voracek a question. And Voracek says, "You're a fucking weasel," and says, "I'm not going to answer your question." So, okay. That had been established. That whole thing was around Sielski writing a piece, I think a year before, maybe a little bit longer, about Voracek and a couple of other players laughing at their lockers when I think it was Elaine Vigneault was talking to the media. And the way that it was framed was as if like the veteran players on the team, or at least Voracek as one of them, wasn't showing respect to Vigneault. And Voracek called him out for it. And Voracek blocked me on Twitter. So again, I'm not going to ride for Voracek. I'm just pointing out the series of events. Well, at some point, Mike Sielski got my number, presumably from Anthony Sanfilippo. And Sielski called me and said, like, you can't say I'm a liar. And I said, well, what do you mean? And so he tried to like lay out this whole thing to me. And then I went back to him with the receipts, with the tweets that were put out, with the headline. I think there was a headline change, but I went back with the series of events. And I was like, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying that you lied in how you got to what you got to. Like the way that you kind of framed things wasn't exactly on the up and up. And that was it. And he was frustrated that I didn't offer a public apology. And I was frustrated that he didn't seem to understand the crux of my issue with him at the time. Okay, so Mike Sielski goes and writes a story about Howard Eskin. Now, mind you, Mike Sielski and Howard Eskin up until about 2 weeks ago worked together at WIP. Howard had his weekend show. Sielski has his weekend show that he first started doing. He replaced Ray Didinger with Glenn Macnow, and then Macnow retired, and I believe it's Rob Ellis, right, is in that spot, so it's Ellis and Sielski. But last summer, when the alleged groping at Citizens Bank Park happened, Sielski was not on thin ice. That would have a negative implication, but it was in the midst, I believe, of Macnow walking away, them looking for a replacement. Could they totally change the show? Were they going to just look to get somebody in there to pair with Sielski? Was Sielski safe? All that. So this alleged groping happens at Citizens Bank Park. Howard Eskin is not fired by Odyssey. He's not fired from his sideline job with the Eagles, but he is banned from being credentialed media at Citizens Bank Park. At that point, Sielski does not, to my recollection, to my searching on the Inquirer's website, on Twitter, I don't see a story written about Howard Eskin or about the sanctity of journalism or credentialed media or about the fact that it's fair or unfair for Eskin to still be allowed at games. So I'm going to go through part of his story. And if you haven't, subscribed to Inquirer.com, they apparently have a special going right now. But we're going to kind of jump around here a little bit. But the story goes as follows. And I thought that the headline was pretty interesting. And I'm going to show you what he tweeted. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you my response to his tweet. But here you go. So the story is as follows. Howard Eskin is gone. Good. The WIP's broadcaster's departure was inevitable and a long time coming. Now, keep a few things in mind. Number one, writers, even columnists, aren't necessarily the ones who come up with the headlines. Writers, columnists aren't necessarily the ones who choose the image. We've been through this a lot of times. Quite often, they have nothing to do with the headline or the image. There's nothing inflammatory about this image. If you remember when Marcus Hayes wrote the takedown of Joel Embiid, the picture included Embiid's young son, and they changed the headline, and they changed the lead to the story, and it wasn't great. So Sielski writes this whole thing, and it starts with this. Howard Eskin's ejection from the Philadelphia sports media scene was only a matter of time. And then the revelation Thursday here in the Inquirer that a recent confrontation with a female employee at WIP, a confrontation that turned physical, had led to a parting of ways between him and the station was hardly shocking. The ice below his feet had been spiderwebbing for months ever since an Aramark employee had accused him of making an unwanted advance toward her. Ever since the Phillies, in turn, had banned him from Citizens Bank Park. One slightly false move and Eskin would be gone. Now he is, and more than inevitable, his departure is a long time coming. Now then he goes and he pulls back the curtain a little bit about what it's like to be a co-host of a weekend show at WIP. And he says, the greatest challenge, at least for me and those hosts who approach the job in a similar manner, is not dealing with the obnoxious callers or getting in and out of commercial breaks. It's the balancing act that you have to carry out. Nature of talk radio itself, and by the reality that WIP is an Eagles and Phillies broadcast rights holder to maintain, yada, 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 okay? Anybody who covers a team in any professional capacity, you have to do one thing first and foremost. You have to take your fan hat off. If you can't be objective, you shouldn't be covering the team, right? If you have to cover if you're covering a team that you've rooted for your entire life and you can't be fair, you can't have that job. You shouldn't be on that beat. That's one. If you are a radio personality, things are a little bit tricky, especially, and I'll give Sielski this. it is hard to be both a columnist and a radio host, because as a radio host, oftentimes people are looking for you to have actual genuine emotions. They want to know where you stand on specific players and where you stand on the team. And that can be hard to do and remain objective in your reporting, because if you're writing very buttoned up, straight-laced things in the Inquirer, but then you're kind of lobbing grenades on the radio, somebody could call you out and say that it's hypocritical and that you have a bias. Well, you wrote this, but what you said on the weekend was this. So I will say that, there is a certain amount of, having to be fair here. Now, I, to a much lesser extent, do this show and do Snow the Goalie and am credentialed and have a partnership with the Flyers through Snow the Goalie. And yet on this show, I'm very critical of the team. I'm very critical of the coach, critical of players. I maintain my ability to remain objective, and at the same time, I can give you my unfiltered take on the team. Perhaps there's a little bit more of a balancing act that Sielski feels like he has to do. Okay, we're going to go back over to this because there's something in here that kind of was wild. He says, Eskin never bothered to scale the ladder to the high wire. His agendas were obvious and calculated. He made no apologies for them. And then he notes that the Sixers were dopes and dogs, no matter the truth or context. Eagles were making brilliant decisions or understandable, forgivable mistakes. That's, of course, is because he was working for the Eagles. So the implication here is that Eskin was nice to the teams who gave him things, was not nice to teams that didn't give him things. Eagles gave him a job as the sideline guy, or at least endorsed his job as the sideline guy. He was nice to them, was a mouthpiece. Sixers weren't as Howard friendly, so he would constantly shit on them. He also puts this idea about Sam Hinkie. Had Sam Hinkie cozied up to him? Had Hinkie done anything other than see him for the phony sycophant he was? Phony sycophant he was. Eskin would have been one of the process's most passionate defenders instead of its loudest detractors. Now, why am I bringing all of this up? Everything that's in here, and again, you can go read the entire story over at Inquirer.com. The entire thing, his shtick, was the precursor to empty, attention-seeking economy that sprouted up in the age of social media. Grandstanding displays at press conferences. Questions intended not to gain insight, but to generate extreme reactions. Okay? And to get succulent sound bites. Insults and false narratives. All of this. Okay? All of this is in the story. But here's the problem. None of this had anything to do with what allegedly happened at Chickies and Pete's. None of this had anything to do with the alleged forcible grabbing of a female Odyssey employee. And he also, and this is the last thing, because this is the real anecdote that kind of adds a little bit of credence to all of this, that when he was younger, when Sielski was younger and he was writing columns for suburban newspapers, he bumped into Eskin, who was working for a local TV station, right, and was operating a handicapping website. And he saw that as a moral quandary, that Eskin might know more about people who were injured, and then was then giving betting advice. He snickers at the suggestion that, and he could have been doing anything wrong. He said, I never really thought about it. Actually, there's nothing you learn in a locker room that can help you. It's the biggest joke that people think you can benefit by being in a locker room. It's a joke. Why do I bring all this up? I wanted to lay out the case. Based on that story, that Howard Eskin is gone, good story, there is nothing in there that is new. There is nothing new in this story that would have otherwise changed what appears to be Sielski's opinion of Eskin. You could have just as easily published that in December as you could have in November or October or September or August or even July. This story could have run directly, immediately after the alleged contact with an Aramark employee at Citizens Bank Park that led to his suspension. So why, oh why, did Mike Sielski wait until now to publish this? Because again, many of the things that are said in there, Eskin being a grandstander, Eskin not looking for actual insightful answers, just looking for juicy sound bites. Those are things that have been said for years. I have been somehow in the local media, local sports media scene for How many years now? 7, 8? And I've heard all of these things before. And I have observed, whether in person or online or through social media, that Howard Eskin has a certain way that he goes about press conferences. He has a certain way that he covered the Eagles versus how he covered the Sixers, or his opinions on one versus the other. That has always been very clear, transparent even. So why didn't the story run? Why didn't Sielski think that it was appropriate to run this back in August? Why did he wait? And so I come back to my original tweet, which was I thought that the timing of it was interesting. Well, Sielski did a thing that you really kind of need to be careful with. He quote tweeted me in an attempt to, I guess, either clear himself or to somehow kind of like take me down a level or two or something. And he quote tweeted me with this, and I'll offer my rebuttal because I wanted to make sure that I set the stage for everyone. So again, I put the thing out and I said, also interesting that a WIP Inky writer waited until now to write a takedown. And here's what Mike Sielski had to say. Yes, I waited until now because we had broken a story about him. That's the way the business works. I wrote in 2004 that he would have been banned from the Eagles locker room. My position on him and how he did his job has been public. I suppose that's interesting. No, what's interesting is the fact that, again, there is nothing new in the story, except the fact that Howard Eskin is gone. That is one important thing. This story could have run in July around the incident at Citizens Bank Park. Sielski could have potentially used his sizable platform at the Inquirer and as a columnist and even as a radio host to call out the behavior and to say that, you know what, as credentialed media, when you go and do what was alleged to have happened with that Aramark employee, you are effectively putting every other credentialed media person in harm's way. You are essentially, to some extent, lowering the public view of what local media do because you went and got yourself involved in something you never should have. You went and did something that you never should have. And at the same time, he could have also called out the fact that Eskin had previously said to him in life, there's no value in being in the locker room. Well, then why are you there? Why are you down at the game? Now, I know some people who have been at more games, including Sixers games, that have said that Eskin did not stay for the entirety of games, often would leave early, that at Phillies games would leave early. This could have been put out in July. One could even argue that if this had been run in July, it might have applied some pressure to perhaps the station. Maybe it's time to figure out a way to send this guy off on his retirement. If they don't want to cut ties with him immediately, maybe it applies a little bit of pressure. But Sielski didn't do that. But why? Why did Sielski wait until Howard Eskin was officially gone from the station before putting out what some called a takedown, some called a hit piece? Again, the accusations at Citizens Bank Park, Chickies and Pete's, if they're true, certainly act upon them. Whatever needs to happen there. He got banned from one park. Presumably, this is what led to him being let go or parting ways with the station. But you could have done this in July and you chose not to. I go back to something I said earlier. What was happening in July last year? Oh, that's right. Mike Sielski and Howard Eskin still worked together at the station. And, oh, that's right. Howard Eskin was always viewed as a mainstay and somebody who helped build WIP into the powerhouse that it is today. And that perhaps maybe waging a public war through the Philadelphia Inquirer could have put Mike Sielski's job with WIP at risk. Oh, and by the way, Glenn Macnow was either about to or was in the process of retiring, and they were trying to figure out his successor. So perhaps Sielski sat on this story, due in part to him wanting to maintain his job at WIP in that weekend show. Maybe it was that. Now, in fairness, I can't blame Sielski for wanting to keep a very nice job on the weekend, for keeping a very nice, successful position on WIP on the weekend. That time slot that Macnow and Didinger had was widely viewed as one of the best blocks of time in the entire week in Philadelphia's sports talk radio. Now, whether or not people liked the show as much after Didinger left and Sielski came on, we're not going there. I'm not going to besmirch anybody's attempts or their efforts or what the show was or wasn't. I am simply pointing out that if Mike Sielski really wanted to write this takedown, he could have done it and released it in July. And perhaps if he had, maybe Howard Eskin doesn't have a public profile anymore. Maybe by the time December rolls around, he's not co-hosting the Brandon Graham show. Maybe he's not at an on-site event. Maybe at this point, he's off enjoying retirement, or maybe he would be. Maybe he would have been doing his own podcast. Maybe he would have gone independent, and he would have been doing a remote show. I don't know. But I think it's very interesting that Sielski could have done this last July, chose not to. Could have done it legitimately any year over like the last 4 or 5 years about what an absolute joke or sycophant, as he called Eskin, the guy is. He could have released this at any point. It's an evergreen story. For all we know, Sielski could have written this 2 years ago and just kind of had it sitting on the back burner. You know, at newspapers, you often write obituaries for very public people. They just kind of sit in a folder so that, like, if and when, like, a Jimmy Carter dies, you have the backbone of a story ready. You're not whipping up a 2,000-word piece or a 1,200-word piece or a 500-word piece. You already have it written. And then you're going to add in some of the details. This story could have been written 5 years ago. Plug and play a couple of things. The problem that I have with it is that Sielski could have done this, could have released this, didn't, and he waited until there was no longer the threat to his job at WIP to then kick Eskin in the ass on the way out. Now, again, Eskin might be a total asshole. I don't know. I've never really interacted with the guy. And maybe Eskin was an absolute asshole to Sielski, which, if that's the case, Sielski's absolutely welcome to write a thing about what an ass Howard Eskin was. But to release it once there was no longer the moral quandary or the potential professional retribution that he might have feared that he would have faced if Eskin still had any power at the station or any sway with any of the higher-up execs, maybe at Odyssey, waiting until now to put this out just feels like kicking a guy who's already kind of like fallen down the stairs. Now, some people might think that that's totally fine and totally fair. And again, it really depends on what you think about the host himself. But this could have gone out. This could have been released months ago, and it wasn't. And to kind of hide behind the idea that, well, the paper had broken the story, and so I come in as like a second wave with an opinion piece. I know how this works. I do. Because the night that Jake Voracek called Mike Sielski a fucking weasel in a COVID game, post-game scrum, Zoom call, I wrote the game story that night for Crossing Broad. I was covering the game for Crossing Broad because Anthony Sanfilippo laid sort of dying in a hospital room with COVID. And I was like, I'm going to write the game story first, and then we'll write the opinion piece about Voracek and what he had to say about Sielski after. I get how it works, but the timing of it was questionable, to say the least. And the real kind of bow on the shit Sunday, or on the shit present, is that, like, it wasn't a particularly good or insightful piece. It was just kind of piling on after the guy's already gone. I don't know. If that's what we're doing at the Inquirer, if that's what columnists at the Inquirer are doing now, all right. But that's not like the bastion of good journalism. That kind of reads like somebody bullied you in middle school, and now that they went to prison, you feel safe to write something. I don't know. I'll go out to the comments. I want to see what people think about this local story. We did the national story to start. We did the local thing now. Let's go over here really quick. Chris Freed says, Sielski once had a plum position with the Wall Street Journal and ended up coming back to town with his tail between his legs. I don't remember him being at the Wall Street Journal. If that is true, I don't remember that. Good for him for getting hired there. You come back, okay. Could be a lot of different reasons. Chris Freed also says, it's obvious that Sielski has a personal axe to grind with Eskin. That's fine. The issue is that since he works for WIP as well, he should have never written it since there is a clear conflict. Again, I can't fault a guy for not wanting to lose his job in a very important spot on the weekend for the station. But then, like, once Eskin's gone, don't write the piece. Like, if you're not willing to put it out, just in general, if you weren't willing to put it out last July when he was still employed by the radio station, waiting until now, until there's no longer the conflict because you're both no longer employees at the station, Some would call that cowardice. Some would call it intelligent, professional angling. I don't know. Not sure. Let's see. We had people talking about the COVID time. Ford says, Eskin isn't hard to figure out. He's a jerk. He's a jerk off. Always has been. He always spoke to callers with disdain. Callers, the people he needs for his show to be successful. He's an asshole. But then Ford says, but again, Eskin tells you and shows you he's a dick. It isn't underground. I think that that's one of the things that, like, you at least, if you hadn't really known Howard Eskin, if you've never interacted with him, right? You know the way that he talked to the callers. You know the way that he interacts with media. You know the way that he interacts with players, with fans. It's pretty transparent. It's not like a hatchet job, right? Like, he's not nice to your face and then, like, stabs you in the back after. Like, if he thinks you're a dope or an idiot or whatever, he tells you that. I don't know. Linda Joseph says Burger King asks the hard-hitting questions and then laughs. Is Linda Joseph actually a burner account for Kevin Kincaid? 610-632. K-Dub 1323 says Team Voracek. And then Eric Berkey also says, he was reiterating. That's right, because Len and Ford had a blow-up on the last show. And I think Ford blocked Len, if I remember correctly. Andrew Fawcett says, weekend job at WIP is great because there's no pressure. That's true. It's also great because 97.5 gets no ratings on the weekend. I had somebody who was involved in or around the Fanatic about a year ago approach me and Ant at a Flyers game and ask, why are you guys not on the Fanatic on the weekend at the very least? We explained what happened with 610 ESPN. We went through the whole thing. And I said, look, if we're going to ever come down and do a show, it has to make sense. Like, you have to get paid for it. And, like, we're already down there doing enough games. There are enough shows. We have regular actual day jobs. We're not going to come down to the Fanatic to, like, work for very little money. It has to make sense. It didn't happen. Like, it didn't work out. But in the process, the guy said, you realize that the ratings on the weekends are practically nothing. Now, I don't know what the number rating is exactly for when McNow and Didinger were doing their show, but I do know that most people that I talked to that liked listening to sports talk radio on the weekend, they were listening to McNow and Didinger at the very least. Now, again, I've said in the past, the people who do the Fanatic weekend stuff, I'm sure they're doing their very best. Whether or not they're being positioned to be the biggest success they can be, maybe not. But I believe that those people are trying. Let's see. Chris Freed said, after Ray Diddy retired, that show became a job for McNow, and it came across as such. I have met McNow a few times. I have never asked McNow about his feelings on doing the show with Didinger versus Sielski. Publicly, he has said that he respected Sielski and the job that they did together and the show. McNow apparently was just ready to retire. Is it possible that, like, maybe he didn't enjoy doing the show as much and maybe would have turned down a one-year deal to, like, stay there? Possibly. Do I know that for a fact? No. Don't know. Let's see. I don't know what this was exactly. Chris was just saying that I was clearly describing the conflict of interest involved. I just think it's one of those things where, like, if you're willing to shit on somebody, right? Like, if you think that somebody who's covering a team is a genuinely horrible person who's going out of their way to do a disservice to their media outlet, to the fans, to whomever, you should be willing to write that. Go ahead, write your takedown. You have to face the person, right? If you write a takedown of a player, Marcus Hayes wrote a column that I still think was wildly off base, at least the lead to it was wildly off base. He had to eventually go down and meet Joel Embiid face-to-face, and I mentioned at the time I thought the Inquirer and the Sixers did one another a disservice by not having those two meet in private, and there was the shove, and that blew up into national news. I think that if media have a problem with how other media are doing things, they should be willing to write that. They should be willing to go on the air and say that. The idea that, like, media is this, like, verboten topic to me is crazy. A taboo topic is, like, insane to me. The amount of people who are in Philly sports media who talk shit on each other behind the scenes is, like, not the most staggering number, but, like, people have their thoughts and opinions on a lot of different folks that are working in radio, in TV, in streaming, they have a lot of thoughts and opinions on one another. You don't usually see them taking it out on the air or in the written word against one another. I just think that when somebody is sent out and is sent packing, if your entire column isn't based on that one event and is instead the body of work and it hasn't really seemingly changed in years, you probably should have considered putting it out after the serious accusation a few months ago instead of waiting until you're no longer both employed by the same outlet. Now, the obvious problem, and Sielski did outline this in his column, is that WIP didn't tell him that he could not write the column that he put out, the Howard Eskin Has Gone Good, but that they kind of understood that as a columnist for the Inquirer, it would be something that would kind of be on the table. And he said that they've never told him what he has to say on the air and that they kind of respect the work that he does for the Inkies, so they're not going to try to step on his toes there. Listen, I'm sure that there's probably the conflict of interest that you can't write something negative about a fellow employee. That's what I'm saying. I just don't think that the right thing to do is after the guy's gone to then kind of kick that wounded dog on his way out. Unless he did something really egregious to you personally, in which case, by all means, unload. But that wasn't in that story either. All right. That's where I'm at. So we did the local story, we did the national story, and I feel like I'm pretty much done with today. Now, the only other thing that I wanted to maybe get into here for a second is the fact that the Eagles and the Packers are going to meet in the wild card round, and we will get into it more and more this week. And I want to make sure that we do like an actual analysis of the matchup as we get closer to the wild card round. I enjoyed yesterday. For what it's worth, Emmanuel Acho did not enjoy yesterday. I, on the other hand, very much enjoyed the end of the regular season because there were 5 teams that were vying for 2 spots in the postseason. Cincinnati gets lauded. Oh, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they're amazing. Just kind of ignoring the fact that they got themselves in yet another hole, and this is one they couldn't climb out of. Cincinnati went into Sunday with an actual chance to make the playoffs if the Broncos and the Dolphins lost. The Dolphins could have made it in if the Broncos had lost and the Dolphins had won. The Broncos just needed to win. They absolutely crushed Kansas City's backups. Poor Carson Wentz didn't even throw for 100 yards in the game. I think it was 38-0. It was a shutout. It was brutal. The NFC South, like, that was interesting. The fact that Atlanta could have potentially gotten in as the winners of the NFC South. Tampa Bay ends up getting through. Sets up an interesting matchup with Washington. We'll get into the wild card round later this week. There are other things that we'll have to get into as well. The Flyers are going to be rotating goalies, it appears. Fedotov looked okay. Looked okay in his first start in weeks. We'll get to them. We'll get to the Sixers as well because the Sixers are very up and down. They appear to maybe be back on the upswing. We'll see. We're going to break all that kind of stuff down later this week. I hope that you didn't mind going on a media journey with me today on the show. Let me know what you think in the comments. I've seen plenty of people throughout the show with their thoughts on Carson Wentz now, on Fedotov, some other stuff from earlier in the show. Let me know what you think. If you found the show through that tweet, you can also let me know in the live comments. You can let me know in the comments after the fact. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the Russ Joy Show over on YouTube. You can also follow this show on X, on Facebook as well. It's also available in podcast form. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back later this week. We'll preview the wild card round, including Eagles-Packers. That'll be the main focus, but we'll look at the entirety of the wild card round, and we'll figure out what the hell's going on with Jalen Hurts. He still hasn't cleared concussion protocol. We got to get into that. Is the line telling us something? We'll get there later this week. But until Wednesday morning, I'm Russ Joy, but you already knew that because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. I'll talk to all of you Wednesday morning here at 8:30 a.m., Thursday for the pro wrestling fans, Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m. for It's Just Wrestling. Oh, and by the way, Tuesday night, the Press Row Show is back. Flyers, Maple Leafs, assuming that the 3 inches of snow that are on the ground right now melt and don't cause road problems. We'll be back with the Press Row Show on Tuesday night down at Wells Fargo Center, up in the balcony level. Take the elevator by section 121, through the glass doors, up to the balcony. You can come talk to me, Ant and Bundy, and intern Andrew. And there's going to be another special guest. At least special to me. All right, anyway, I will talk to all of you Wednesday morning here on the Russ Joy Show. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to all of you very, very soon.